Good evening. It's been a long day, and it's a very difficult act to follow with such great presentations through the day. And when everybody is before you, a lot that one has to say has already been said. So one risks boring people by just repeating what is there. I don two hats. The hat that runs the practice, and the other hat that at the moment runs the landscape program at SEPT. And I've been doing this for quite some time, and in that sense, my role has been to see the connect and the transition between practice and academia, and to see how what is applied in a practice can be taken back to academia, and how new ideas can be developed within the academia and also tested in the practice. So in a way, what I am showing today is not my work. It's the work of a lot of people. It's the work of all the faculty and students at SEPT University, the work of all the people who work with me in the practice. And I'm just the medium who's putting it together. And for a very long time, we have felt this need that what one does in a practice, because it is not formulated as a process, it is very difficult for young practitioners to be able to emulate these processes. It is very difficult for them to build up. There exists a lot of knowledge in our profession which is not clear or which is not easily available. So as one of the things that we or I try to do in the practice is to transfer this knowledge into academia, and also to help develop processes that allow young practitioners to look at landscape in different means. And it is in this light that I'm putting up today's presentations, which is called as the Mythmakers. A lot of what we've been experimenting at our practice, and a lot of what has come up through all the work that we've done in the academia, has led us to create this very broad-based process, which is obviously is a very large work in progress, and it encompasses several entities, but it also helps us to make meaning. It helps us to create a very structured process that young practitioners can follow as a framework if they wish to look at all the kind of wonderful projects that we've seen through today. And so Prachi asked me to put some videos, and I thought I'll start with one. So I hope there are Star Wars fans. So, I don't understand music, but if someone were to ask me how this famous music came to be, these are actually the notes for the music, and I don't know what it means at all. There may be some music aficionados who can read this, and if someone says, okay, what are the tools from which I can make that great music? And these are the tools, and I don't know how to play them, what sequence to play them, and how to make it together, and how I can create that music that has went on through decades and inspired people. The point I'm trying to make is that when we do things that are outcomes, so this is one of the projects that we've done, one of the serious concerns that we found over a period of time is that the outcome is nice, it is appreciated, it makes sense, but if people don't understand what this outcome means, I don't think it is successful. The value of this output is if the users of this space understand what it brings to the table, understand how it reduces facade albedo, understand what value it brings to their office space, to the context, to the surrounding and to the neighborhood. And I cannot put plaques everywhere to explain this. So there needs to be a process for looking at this. And in that sense, I want to discuss the phenomenology of climate and how that phenomenology can be used to explain a very, very complicated process to everyone. And what is the role of landscape architects in doing this? So this is what comes to our mind when we talk about climate change, right? Everybody thinks this is what is going to happen, some dystopian future. In fact, like the story that was just told to us, something falls from a tree, something happens, and it's very difficult, and it is inevitable what is going to happen. But the meanings behind that are extremely complex. And even if we started discussing the enormous science that leads to climate change, I think we'll still be here after several years, and we've seen that in the IPCC reports, just trying to make sense of what it is. In that sense, decision making becomes even more complex, and for young practitioners, they just feel overwhelmed as to what decision making can help them. Where do you start when you see things like this? And even if you had the tools, even if you knew this is probably a comprehensive set of diagrams that shows most of the work that was put up today, but what is the sequence in which to put it together? How do you use the building blocks? What is the right way? What are the various ways? And on top of it all, how do you get people to understand all of this? And there is another joke, but Prachi again stole my thunder in that, because I was going to talk about the elephant. So, climate is the elephant, and we all agree. Oh, I'm late. But we see different parts of it, and we see different concerns as different professionals, and we want to understand what they are. But I think it is the whole that is important, and the whole is a system. It's not an object. The object is what you view, what you experience. The system is what runs that object. And it is very, very important for young landscape professionals to understand how to design or how to intervene in a systemic manner, rather than look at only objective outcomes or visual or aesthetic outcomes. Of course, they are important, but the process that leads to that is equally important. So, I mean, you could extend that discussion endlessly. The elephant is still within the system, and there are larger systems. And this is like climate change, right? You don't know where you are, what it is, what are the so innately complex relationships that one is trying to find. And I think that at some point of time, one has to start understanding that it is not about gaining scientific accuracy all the time. That is not the job, at least of a landscape architect. And on the other hand, if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't have the knack to project and to figure out, you will face something like this. And that will come back after a period of time that one may not know when it does come. So there's an interesting experiment that I always showcase. This is about a group of scientists who took 5 monkeys in a room and put a banana on top. And every time one monkey went up the ladder trying to pick a banana, they would put very cold water over the monkey. So after a period of time, the other monkeys started hitting the monkey who tried to go up the chain. And what happened is they started replacing the monkeys. So they replaced the first monkey, but the 4 monkeys knew why the cold water was falling, and then slowly and slowly they replaced all the monkeys. So now none of the monkeys knew why they were beating up the monkey who tried to climb the ladder. And if we could ask them, they would say, well, this is how things are done around here. This is the way it is. And that is blind faith. So, how does a landscape architect create programs, create ideas that can germinate faith, not blind faith, but faith in a positive or negative manner, that promotes people to behave in certain ways, that helps them to understand that there are behaviors that are required to be done, because otherwise you are looking at patterns like these without knowing how you can influence the patterns of human behavior, which is extremely important, because as designers, as technocrats, as scientists, we may create extremely nuanced, extremely specific designs, but unless people understand the depth of what it is, they associate with it, they take ownership of it, it becomes very, very difficult for the design to succeed in any different manner. The system essentially is an iceberg. You see what is happening now. The part that you don't see and the part that the landscape architect must think deeply about, must design, is the part all of it is below, the unseen. And this is what I want to talk about today, is that we cannot mitigate climate impacts by exclusively dealing with them in a rationalistic manner or through engineered frameworks. We must look at the whole. We must understand the systems that create the socio-cultural constructs which allow us to develop holistic responses, each dependent on the other. And because we people are the dominant species on the planet, the responses have to include people at the very core of them. We cannot talk about people-less spaces, people-less landscapes, because that robs them of a sense of ownership, that robs them of a sense of cultural and social history. And all those spaces eventually become contested spaces where, in all the examples that we've seen today, somebody can take over very, very conveniently and nobody will raise a voice about it. So, if landscape designers can achieve this along with the designs they do, and it's a very tall ask, I don't think that there could be a greater reward possible for them to see. And one of the great concerns of our age is this: when we started off before the internet age, you would go to the library, have something, and you think a lot about it and abstract a lot about it, and that would lead to something. We are being bombarded with information. We don't know which is the right one from all different dimensions. Everybody claims to be an expert on Instagram or social media, whatever else. And there is this huge wasteland of over-analysis that today's professionals, especially the young professionals, must navigate. And this is the space that makes it so difficult for them to understand which is the right response and how they can figure out the right response. And of course, landscape architects must rely on their fundamental skill, which is creating great places to live and inspire people. But it has to come along with sensitization. It has to come along with integration of not just physical aspects, not just physical spaces, but also the way people live, the way their life is led, and the way it can integrate into the spaces that are being created. So a simple project we did quite long ago. It had two very, very simple briefs. It's in a low-lying area, and the soil is very, very heavy, and the water, when it falls, it doesn't percolate very easily. So one was to allow the rainwater to stand and percolate over a very, very long period of time. And the other was, obviously, this is a factory in the back, to allow the factory workers to come out and recreate a bit during the lunch or something like that. And what it essentially is a percolation basin and a series of mounds, and everything's on top of it. Because when it rains, it really just becomes a pool of water with mounds in it. And the way we positioned it was at the entrance, so that the observation of the process itself over weeks, months, years, decades, allows the people to see it for real and not take our word for it. To see how water can fall on that space, percolate slowly into the thing, and this landscape itself can transition over a very, very long period of time. So the positioning of the design, the orientation of it have a lot to do with the way landscapes are experienced. It is the aesthetic that holds the gaze and makes it attractive, obviously, but it is the observation, it is the repeat value of coming there that allows them to gain deeper relationships with the space itself. And that is something that the landscape architect must create. So how does one do this sort of multidimensional synthesis? And this is an idea that we've explored several times in our studios in many different ways, and I'll show you some examples that we have done. To unravel the system behind the design is not just to attack the space itself, but to attack the idea of the space, is to attack how all of those ideas can become an interconnected matrix. They can start creating patterns like the ones we saw in the experiment, and those patterns allow us to put together a very complex and nuanced narrative that becomes the aspiration of the design. It may not be, and it won't be 100% achievable in most cases, but this becomes the measure against which the design can always be weighed, it can always be tested, and it can always be debated. This is very important as a process to understand where you started, where you're leading it, and how do you always keep your North Star with you. So another example, some of us landscape architects got together in Ahmedabad, and we really wanted to do something about the quality of the public parks and the way they were being put together. And like Karmavit was showing today, in our case, the typical public park is a garland pathway with a lawn in the center, obviously. And we just started by, of course, the analysis that we do, and we also started by talking to the people around, by trying to understand what these derelict pieces of land mean to them. Do they have any associated value? So this one is probably where people, because this is a very diagonal piece of land, people sort of cross it all the time to come to the main street. There is a metro station that's going to come up on that, and there are children who play cricket in this, and we did not think that robbing this value would make a greater park for us. So we integrated those aspects. We integrated, of course, the fundamental values of the park that it must provide for the people, which is health, fitness, and of course a green cover. And the design then became very simple. It was very minimal, but I think what we in post occupancy, what we found was joyful was that the children were still playing cricket afterwards, that the people were still crossing the park, and by crossing the park, again, like I said in the previous example, they were observing what happens in the park over a very long period of time. And that itself, that itself is probably a very minuscule part. It doesn't require you to change your design at all, but it brings great change in the way the outcome is perceived by the people who stay around. And that is very valuable. In a similar way, we did another park in Surat this time. This is a 3-kilometer park in the center of a street, and the only opportunity and the reason that this park came to be was because the land was contested between two agencies of the government, and they would not agree on one thing or the other. So it allowed us the opportunity to do a third thing, which none of them agreed on. This is an upcoming area of Surat. Lots of high density housing, institutions, other things happening. But it was a farmland. It was a farmland that was supplied by the canal that is in the center. And the memory of that farmland, the memory of the people who came there earlier was very valuable in all the discussions that we had in that area. Very interestingly, I was in Wakad in the morning and I was speaking to my friend who stays there. And he said, when I came there in 2015, this was all farmlands. We did not need even a fan. And Wakad today, without an AC, is an impossible space. And I think that is the memory that one as a user hinges onto, and that memory is very powerful. And our job was very simple. Surtis are fond of sitting late in the night, bringing their own food, laying it out on the middle of the street, eating, joyfully talking, and we just needed them to give them a space to do that. So one, the memory of them experiencing a green space, how you could bring it back and allow them to continue experiencing over a longer period of time. Of course, with some added aesthetic impression that allows the modern, what we call them, Instagrammers and all of those to also capture and build up the hype of the space itself. But very essentially, spaces like these are unlockable. Even if the corporation wants, they cannot lock this space down. And it's a 24/7 choke for all the people sitting around to be hanging around here 24/7. And these are interspersed across each junction, each breakway of the project itself. And the corporation found it so beneficial, they started putting kiosks where there were none, and this is probably the best earning space for them. This is probably the best seating space for the people 24/7, because when they are inside their societies, it's a very curated environment. This is a very free space for them to experience. And you can see them walking all over. And that also gives a very different experience to the street itself than what typically street design exercise would do. In a similar manner, to change scales and to look at how you could look at these ideas at a much, much larger scale. This is an earthquake victims memorial which was done on the only hill in Bhuj. And again, the brief that was developed over a very, very long period of time with Vastushil consultants was simple: allow water to recharge and plant trees to go through that space. And the sense of one being able to grieve the event itself and to aspire for a future that is much greater than what you lost are the two totems that hold the project, where this has become now a very, very famous site, not just in the region but all across India, and people from everywhere are trying to come here and see what it's about. And to convert that tragedy into something that can help the next generation see that some value can be gained by looking at it in different perspectives. So essentially our job was to do nothing, to just plant and create these water recharge structures, and not to make it overly complex in a certain way. But the making of the brief was something that was very difficult, and it took us a lot of time to come to that decision. So then one comes back to the first question that I was asking: what is this beast that we call as systemic thinking? And how does a landscape architect design the lived experience for everyone? So these are examples from the work that students do in the studio, but also some of the kinds of things that we do in our practice. These allow us to visualize. This one allows us to visualize theoretical patterns. This one is created out of 4 contemporary papers, and it puts together the core ideas, brings out the highlights of it. It's a very visual expression of probably 200 pages of data. And similarly, it allows us to look at history very differently. So this one is a very interesting graphic that talks about the transition of agriculture in Gujarat and Maharashtra from a rain-fed system to a canal-fed system by the British to a groundwater-fed system after the arrival of the diesel gensets and tube wells. And the impact of that, not just on the hydroecology of the space, but also in the socio-politics, in the way that control over land changed. It became more decentralized, where if you had a diesel genset, you could actually control what your neighbor could grow if he or she did not have a diesel genset. we could actually control the market at micro levels and then influence larger pieces. And that obviously has impacts in many different dimensions, which we know of as the Great Drought and what happened in the early 1900s in India. And unless as landscape architects we understand that one simple measure which the Britishers used to monetize their systems could in fact lead to several consequences as a waterfall effect over a longer period of time. And the idea is obviously one person cannot put that projection into one mind, but the idea is to keep doing this as a mental exercise until you get better and better at it over a period of time. So as a response to these studies, the way the students design spaces or the way the landscape architects design spaces also has to change. So this is a space design. This is a calendar. We use the word calendarization for this, which tells us what are the different programs across the year, across different seasons and across all the local festivals